This is an English porter that you can brew at home. It's a delicious, low-strength beer style that often has malt-forward flavors of caramel, biscuits, and chocolate. In this video, I'll show you how I made it, a few tips during the process, and a taste test of the final beer at the end. Let's brew. An English porter is typically softer, less roasty, and lower in alcohol compared to the porters and stouts we have in America. The base of this recipe is Otter with some Munich, Biscuit, and Crystal 40, and I also have a bit of pale chocolate and chocolate malt mixed in here as well. The mash is the first main step of all grain brewing. This is when hot water is mixed with the grain to create a sweet liquid called wort. For this 6-gallon batch, I'm starting with 3 gallons of reverse osmosis water that I'll heat to 175 degrees. This is 15 degrees above my strike temperature. After I pump my strike water over to the mash tun, the system will cool down to a strike temperature of 160 degrees. I'll let the HLT finish heating up and go mill my grains to get them crushed. Here's what the grain looks like after going through the mill. The key thing to look for is a completely cracked grain with mostly intact husk. But you don't want to completely pulverize the husk because we'll need that to help filter the liquid when we later separate it from the grain. The HLT is now at 175 degrees, so I'm going to pump the water over to the mash tun to preheat the system. The mash tun is now preheated with my strike water and it has stabilized at 160 degrees. Before I add in the grain, I'm going to adjust my water chemistry by adding in a bit of calcium chloride, calcium sulfate, and magnesium sulfate. This is an optional step and will only make a minor tweak to the final beer. However, it is important to use good tasting chlorine-free water. Alright, the water is ready for the grain. I'm going to shut off the pump and the heater and begin to dough in. It's best to slowly and evenly mix the grain with the hot water. What we want to avoid is getting any dough balls in here, which prevents water from evenly penetrating the grain. Now that the grain is mixed in, the system has cooled down to 152 degrees, which is the mash temperature I'll keep stable for the next 45 minutes. It's been about 10 minutes. I'm now going to check the pH of the mash just to make sure we're in a good zone. While the mash is finishing up, I will add an additional 6.5 gallons of water to my HLT, and I'll preheat that to 170 degrees for the lauter step. It's been 45 minutes. I'm now going to raise the mash temperature to 168 degrees for the lauter step. The purpose of the step is to aid in the extraction of sugars in the grain. The warmer temperature of the mash and the hot sparge water will help increase the extraction efficiency as I move the liquid over to the boil kettle. The mash is up to temp for the lauter. I'm going to open up the whirlpool valve to start transferring to the boil kettle. I'll typically do a fly sparge, which is a grain rinsing process that involves slowly adding fresh water to the mash tun while the wort is transferring to the kettle. The goal is to keep both flow rates equal. And this step should take about 40 to 60 minutes on a system of this size. If you go too fast during this step, you risk leaving too much sugar in the mash bed, which results in a lower efficiency. I have about 7 gallons transferred over to the boil kettle. I'm now going to kick on the heater as the remainder of that wort is transferred. We are at full volume, so I'm going to give this a quick stir and take a small sample to measure the pre-boil gravity. I'm using the Anton Par Easy Dens, which is a digital hydrometer. And this meter measures the density of the wort so that I can record the extraction efficiency of the mash. The cool thing about this meter is it only uses a small sample size and can be used at all stages during the brewing and fermentation process. If you would like one of these meters, use my coupon code to save 10% for a limited time only. Alright, my pre-boil gravity is 1.038. minutes. We are coming up to a boil, so I'm gonna add in a few drops of anti-foaming agent to help reduce the chance of boilovers. Now it's time for the hops. This is 11 grams of Warrior hops, which will add about 19 IBUs to the beer. There are 15 minutes remaining in the boil. I'm now adding in 1 whirl flock tablet, which is used to help clarify the beer and flocculate some of that protein in the wort. And now for the final 10 minutes of the boil, I'm adding in a little yeast nutrient. For an all malt wort like this, the grain will provide all the yeast nutrients needed with the exception of zinc, but I still like to add it just as cheap insurance. The boil is finished, so I'm turning off the heater and I'm gonna start a 5-minute whirlpool. It's been 5 minutes. I'm now going to turn off the pump and let this rest for 10 minutes so that the trub can form a nice cone in the center of the kettle. I'm almost ready to knock out into the fermenter. I'm connecting my groundwater to my plate chiller, which will be used to cool down the wort as it's transferred into the fermenter. And I'll run the outbound of the groundwater into a bucket so I can use it for some laundry later on. I'm going to ferment this batch at 66 degrees, but I'm going to cool down the fermenter to 64 degrees for the yeast pitch. While the fermenter is cooling, I'm going to oxygenate my wort through the carb stone on my unit tank. For 6 gallons, this is about 60 to 90 seconds at a flow rate of 1 liter per minute. I'm taking a small sample from the fermenter to measure the oxygen concentration and also the original gravity. First, I'll measure the gravity with the Easy Dins. We are at a gravity of 1.047. And next, I'll measure the oxygen concentration. A good goal is around 10 to 15 ppm of oxygen. The last step for today is to pitch the yeast. After the boil process, it's very important to keep everything sanitized to prevent bacterial infections. This is a mix of distilled water and Star San in my spray bottle. I made a yeast starter for this batch yesterday, and I'm going to pitch the full 2 liters directly into the fermenter. I'm going to allow the tank to free rise to 66 degrees, and I'll keep it there for about a week until we hit a gravity of around 1.012. Then I'll let the tank free rise to 68 degrees for a 2 to 3 day diacetyl rest. I'll leave a link in the description regarding the diacetyl rest process. The English Porter has been kegged, carbonated, and is now ready for review. First off, the color of this beer is super dark. It's not completely black, but definitely a dark brown. As I hold it up to the light, I get a little bit of the amber and ruby undertones in there as well. And the head is kind of a lightish tan color. Definitely dominant on some caramel, bread type of notes. There's some biscuit in there. I'm really not getting much from the hops, maybe a little bit of earthiness, but overall really clean profile. Definitely more of that caramel, some toffee in there as well. There is a little bit of some chocolate and roasted character to this, but it's very mild. You would think for a dark colored beer like this that there'd be a lot more roasted flavor and chocolatiness to there, but this one is not. It's very restrained. It's very dominant on the caramel, and there's really not much from the hops, low bitterness. I think one change I might make to this beer is just bump up the Maris Otter just a few percent, just to bring up that richness and that malt character for this beer. Plus maybe bump up the alcohol just a little bit, but overall pretty good beer. Thank you so much for hanging out for this English Porter Brew Day. Let me know down in the comments if you have any questions, and don't forget to subscribe. Cheers.